Mr. President, recent polls show that your public trust has risen.
Yes.
And at the same time, they show that the job rating is dropping and continues to drop. Now, 50% of the people have said, of those polled, have said that they don't want you to run again. Do you have a reaction to the slide in the polls and reasons why it may be that way?
Well, as a matter of fact, to be more accurate, I think that the polls have shown recently that my assessment of performance has been about steady for the last number of months, but the trust that American people have in me has gone up. You know, it's always interesting to talk about polls, but I think they have very little significance. What I have to do as president is what Harry Truman had to do when he was in the White House, and that is to make some very difficult decisions under the most trying of circumstances. And I've tried to make those decisions, each one of them individually, to the best of my ability, according to what I think is in the long-range interest of our country. Some of them have been highly controversial. We've had remarkable success in some of our major proposals, cutting down the unemployment rate, putting American agriculture economy back on a stable footing. We've had notable success in some of our foreign policy matters, but we've still got some difficult issues that haven't been resolved. I have made my proposals to the Congress. The Congress has not yet acted on things like an energy policy for our nation, or controlling the federal bureaucracy with civil service reform, or controlling the cost of hospital care, or cutting down the cost of airplane travel. These kinds of things are now in the hands of Congress. Last year, when the Congress adjourned, we had a very good record on which we could base our performance assessment by the American people. And I would guess that in November, when the members of Congress face the voters, that we'll have another indication of whether or not the American people think I and the Democratic Congress have done a good job. Ordinarily, even when the president in office had the highest popularity, after the first 2 years, his party lost a large number of seats in the House of Representatives. My guess is that the American people basically think that I'm doing the best I can, and that I and the Congress together have done a good job.
What about the latest Gallup poll, which shows Kennedy leading you about 2-1 as far as the preferred Democratic nominee in 1980? Does that affect you at all as far as running? Definitely, are you going to run, and would Kennedy entering the race affect that at all?
Well, when I started to plan to run for president in 1976, I was struggling valiantly to try to get Gallup and Roper and the others to even know what my name was, so they would put me on the list of those who were running. I think at that time Kennedy had maybe a 65 or 70 or 75% approval. And I was perfectly willing to run against him or run against George Wallace or anyone else. My decision to run for president in 1980 will not be affected by who else might run. This is a time when the incumbent has to be responsible for every problem that the American people feel, or for the consequences of every controversial decision that I make. I think the American people indicate to me personally, and through the polls as well, if you want to use the polls, that they believe that I'm doing the best I can, that I genuinely care about their problems. And that rating has gone up quite steadily. So I don't worry about the poll results. I think the poll, and the only one that counts is in an election year, we'll have a preliminary poll to assess in November of 1978. I think the Democrats are going to do fairly well. And in 1980, I'll be prepared to let the voters decide how they want to poll my performance in an actual election.
Despite the polls, whether we can believe them or not, there has been some turmoil in your administration lately. The resignations of Dr. Bourne, of Mitch Costanza, fights with Tip O'Neill and George Meany. Does this mean that there's an administration in disarray, or does this hurt your effectiveness in running the country?
Well, the resignations on my staff are a routine thing that has always happened in every president. There's a great concentration of media interest now in details of administration that in the past would not have even been noticed. I've got a very stable cabinet, for instance. Every one of them who serves with me, if I had it all to do over again, I would choose them again. I would hope that I finished my term in the White House with the same members of the cabinet. They're very, very good. I just would like to say that there are times when I have strong differences of opinion with George Meany or even the Speaker or other members of the Congress. I have to stand up for what I think is right. If they disagree, that's their judgment to make. I don't fear that. as long as I think that I'm making the right decisions to the best of my ability. So controversy, okay. I'm not afraid to make difficult decisions. If I had been, I wouldn't have got as far as I am now. And I think what we've done basically is in the best interest of our country, and I'm willing to fight my battles, win most of the time, lose sometimes, even have controversy if necessary to serve the American people well.
Do you think the fights with O'Neill or Meany could hurt your legislation that you're working for, the big programs you've mentioned?
Well, the basic problem with George Meany, for instance, is that I have not been able to get him and some other labor leaders to join in with us in controlling inflation. And when a wage contract was negotiated by an international president and his officers for the postal workers in an unprecedented way, never before heard of in labor circles, George Meany, president of AFL-CIO, came out and condemned the settlement that his own international president had negotiated. I take very strong issue with that. And I think that the postal workers themselves ought to be able to make a decision about what's best for them in their future, including the effects of inflation, without interference by George Meany. If he wants to act that way, I have no hesitancy about expressing my displeasure in the strongest terms.